Welcome to Sunday Sermons, brought to you by the Chapel Podcast Network. Let's grab our Bibles and open up to the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verses 1 through 5 and verses 14 through 25. I'll read verses 4 and 5 for us now, as we prepare to hear from Tim Latham as he helps us continue in our sermon series titled, The Exodus Way. Pharaoh will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them.
I don't mind being the new person. I really like to make new connections and forge new relationships. However, it's a threatening time for me because I have a tendency to do this odd and slightly off-putting thing where I will rush past the normal get-to-know-you phase in order to establish rapport with someone quickly. I kind of friendship level jump as soon as I can. For instance, when I have an appointment with a new doctor, it's my goal to introduce myself in a way that we're using inside jokes or new nicknames that we have that connection right away. So I go in pretty warm and I say, hey doc, hey sawbones, things like that. And I know what you're thinking. Tim, that sounds really cool. I bet you strangers love it when you give them a nickname the first time you meet with them. And the answer is yes, normally, but occasionally it does not work out that well. A few years ago, I had an appointment with a new eye doctor, and her last name was Scavo. And so I said, well, that's amazing. Scavo is the name of the village in one of my favorite movies, the 1996 masterpiece film, The Ghost in the Darkness. Now, we're going to do a show of hands. Who here has seen The Ghost in the Darkness with Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas? Wow, not that many hands, but a couple. That's okay because your reaction is probably the same as Dr. Scavo's. The way that I brought up the name, she thought that this was going to be like a charming, heartwarming, family-friendly movie that was like very charming with the name of Scavo. But in actuality, The Ghost and the Darkness is about this pair of man-eating lions that terrorize workers who are trying to build a railroad through Africa. They keep eating and killing the people. It's a fun movie. It's actually based on a true story. These lions killed over 100 people, and you can see the actual lions on display. They're stuffed and on exhibit at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, so you can plan your next vacation around these man-eating lions if you'd like. So anyway, that was a good introduction, right? She got to know me pretty well. I feel like there was no chance they were not going to remember me when I went back the next time. When I got home, though, I ran into a small problem, which is I felt like my story might not have been factually correct. So I did some Googling, and it turns out that the name of the town is Savo and not Scavo. So at this point, I knew that I had to call the doctor's office and correct my mistakes. I couldn't get through to the doctor, so they asked if I wanted to leave a message with the receptionist to pass along, and I said, obviously, yes. And I said, funny story, my name is Tim, and I'm a new patient of Dr. Scavo's, and I told her all about these man-eating lions who killed like 100 people in a town in Kenya called Scavo, but actually, the town is pronounced Savo with no K and a silent T. So if you could let her know that, well, just let her know that she's all good. I'll see you guys next time. So I definitely made a very strong impression on my new doctor. And I tell you this story because we are at this really pivotal moment in Exodus where God is making himself known, where he's introducing himself to both his people and the Egyptians, not awkwardly, but powerfully, clearly, and unmistakably. And he's introducing himself in kind of on two prongs at the same time. So right before our reading in Exodus 6 is one of the most important verses in Exodus and maybe all the Old Testament, where God says, I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And then here in verse 5, we have the other side of that. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them. The plagues are God introducing himself to his people and the Egyptians, that they will know he is the Lord. So this morning, I want to look at 3 ways that God makes himself known for us in the plagues. First, that we should know the God of awe. Second, that we must know the God of judgment. And finally, we must know the God of rescue. So first, the God of awe. If we look at the Bible, usually God introduces himself with power. In the Old Testament, we see God's power demonstrated in creation, with the flood, with parting the Red Sea. His presence is often described with fire or thunder, with mountains shaking, these big, huge displays of power. And in the Gospels, Jesus' miracles function the same way. They make people in the crowds ask the question, who is this who controls the storms, who stills the water, who makes the blind men see? People's first impression of Jesus was amazement. And in the Old Testament, it's the same way, except we use different words. So we have people who are described as God-fearers. A few weeks ago, when Travis was introducing us to Exodus, we talked about the 2 midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and it said that they feared God. This doesn't mean that they were scared of God exactly, but something larger, that they were amazed, they were in reverence, they respected and were in awe of God's power. That brings us to a fun little nerd tangent this morning, what I like to call etymology corner. So I want you to picture 2 English words, awesome and awful, right? So awesome and awful. Awful and awesome are very similar words. Okay, awesome means literally filled with awe, A-W-E, right? And awful means full of awe, A-W-E. Those are basically the same thing if you look at them literally. And that was the original intent of the word awful. I found a definition of awful from I guess it was the 13th century, and it said, worthy of respect or fear, striking with awe, causing dread. It was all encompassing was awful. But in modern times, we have weakened those definitions to where awesome just means very good and awful just means very bad. We've split the concept of this power that amazes to be good or bad because it's easier for us to understand. Think about it a different way. If after the sermon, if Tommy came up to sing a song and instead of our God is an awesome God, he's saying, our God is an awful God, we would not like that. We would react poorly to that, even if most of the lyrics could stay the same, even if it's getting at the same truth about God's power above creation and everything in the world. Awful and awesome are 2 sides of the same coin, and God's power encompasses both. We struggle with things like the plague sometimes because the power that is displayed is justifiably terrifying. It's scary stuff. But the point is that God has this power to awe, to astonish, to amaze. I believe this is why God's power is so often presented in terms of nature, because nature is much the same. Is a tornado awesome or awful? Is a hurricane, a volcano, a thunderstorm rolling in off the ocean, are those things awesome or awful? Yes, the answer is both. There is beauty and terror in the power itself. And God uses the beauty and terror and in the power of the natural world to showcase that he is in ultimate control. And here's what I mean. So if you look at the plagues, I know right now we're mainly talking about the first plague, But the first 9 plagues are presented together. They are presented in these kind of detailed patterns. For instance, there's in the first triad, so 1, 2, and 3, they all use Aaron's staff. In the last triad, they all use Moses' staff. There's also an order to the groups of 3. So in plagues 1, 4, and 7, Moses goes to Pharaoh and finds him in the morning to inform him what is going to happen. And plagues 2, 5, and 8, Moses goes to Pharaoh in the throne room to tell him what's about to happen. And then in plagues 3, 6, and 9, he doesn't inform him. They go unannounced. So there is a pattern in these, in the plagues. And the point here is that the plagues themselves are all things of nature. They're natural order. They're animals. They're water. They're night and day. They're things that we would think of as natural disasters. But God is placing a pattern onto them so that we can see that they are intentional. God is wanting the Egyptians to see that he has supernatural command over the natural world. So the plagues show us that we have this nature of God, that people should be awed by his power over all things. But God's power doesn't just amaze, it also exposes Pharaoh and Egypt. It overwhelms their false gods, showing that not only is God powerful, he is also just. That's our second point this morning. Know the God of judgment. To be honest with you all, the plagues are a difficult thing difficult for me to preach, because usually in the Bible, when something harsh is happening, we can point to a lesson that is being learned, or we can point to the fruit of endurance in soldiering through it, or to an earlier choice that someone could have made to avoid it, or for a chance at a longer, bigger picture of redemption. But when we look at this text, we see that this isn't really about Pharaoh learning or repenting. In verse 14, God tells Moses, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. He refuses to let the people go. So Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He's stubborn. He's unwilling to listen. And if we look back further, in chapter 4, God tells Moses, when you go back to Egypt, make sure you do all the wonders I have put in your power before Pharaoh, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let my people go. So Pharaoh's heart has been hardened both by himself and by God intentionally. So the story can't be about Pharaoh repenting or changing his mind. The point is God is using Pharaoh's hard-heartedness to display his power and his justice. This is all divine justice for the evils that Pharaoh has already perpetrated. We see this in chapter 4 as well. God says, you will say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn son. I told you to let my son go, that he may worship me, but you refuse to let him go. Look, I am about to kill your firstborn son. And Travis will cover the Passover next week, but it's important for us to see the first 9 plagues not as miracles in order to change Pharaoh's mind or teach him a lesson, but acts of divine judgment against a king and a people who have oppressed God's people. God is delivering justice to Pharaoh, who tried to kill off the Hebrew children, who worsened their treatment as slaves, who revoked their freedom to worship Yahweh. And Pharaoh says he doesn't know who this God of Hebrews is because the Egyptians have over 1,000 gods of their own, and Pharaoh himself was considered to have divine authority. And so each time the plagues come up, Pharaoh's authority is challenged. One of the Egyptian gods is confronted, and Egypt as a whole is put on notice. In fact, each of the plagues directly challenges one of these gods of Egypt. So the first plague we have that we're talking about today, Moses and Aaron, they go to the Nile, they lift the staff, they strike the water, it turns to blood. The fish die, the river stinks, and the Egyptians cannot drink the water. Well, it's important for us to know that the Nile was the lifeblood of ancient Egypt. It was the reason that they were able to flourish. It was the source of their food, their water, their trade power, their military power. Specifically, it was the flooding of the Nile. And that was each year, like clockwork, the Nile would overflow, and it gives Egypt fertile soil on which to grow their food. And then Egypt took off as a civilization when they learned how to capitalize on this flooding, and they built a system of basin irrigation. And so the flooding of the Nile was the pivotal moment in the Egyptian year. And in fact, it was so important that they had a god who's called Hapi, who was the Nile River flood god. It was a personification of a god itself. And so when we look at this first plague, it's confronting Pharaoh's authority, it's challenging the Nile River god of Hapi, and it's threatening the security of Egypt, who is utterly dependent on the river. And the rest of the plagues function the same way. Each plague poses a direct challenge to something that one of the Egyptian gods is supposed to be in control of. And some of them are rather personal. Honestly, if we look at a list, I'll read a list of the plagues. It's not just that these are scary, powerful. It's that they seem like odd things for God to choose to use to introduce himself. So just the first plague in the water. Then we have the plague on the frogs, which seems strange until you know that the Egyptian goddess of fertility named Heket, she's depicted with the head of a frog. You've got the plague of gnats, the plague of flies, where there's a god of creation and earth who his head is either a fly or a beetle, depending on who you look at. The plague of the livestock, scholars can't agree which cow-headed Egyptian god is being directly confronted with this one. The plague of boils, the plague of hail, the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness, that's a direct challenge to Ra, the sun god. See, each of these make more sense when you see how they confront some of the Egyptian gods. God is dismantling Pharaoh's authority and directly overpowering the false gods of Egypt. He's proving that they have no power because he is the one true God. So the lesson is not for Pharaoh, it is for the people to see God's oneness above all the idols that they might worship in their lives, to know God, to know his justice. Tim Keller said that plagues are an answer to the question, why should we obey God? Well, one answer here is because he is the God of all, who has this power over creation and decreation. Another is because he is the only God, the true God, a God of justice, who brings divine judgment when it is necessary. And yet, if the story ended here with awe and judgment, it would be a terrifying introduction to God. Fortunately, Exodus shows us the fuller picture and another reason to obey, that the same God who brings judgment to Egypt is also the God who loves and cares and saves his people. And that's our final point this morning, that we must know the God of rescue. One of my favorite parts about being a parent is that you get to force your kids to listen to your favorite books. Thank you. So for the last few years, I've been reading the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis when I get a chance to my oldest. He's a boy. Andrew is 6 years old. And there's a great moment in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that always gets to me. But I guess if you don't know what the Chronicles of Narnia is, it's a kind of a set of fantasy novels written by a theologian aimed at children. It takes 4 siblings from our human world, or England at least, and puts them in this magical world of Narnia where where they learn a lot. And in Narnia, the Jesus figure is a talking lion named Aslan. Okay, that's the context you need. So the kids are very nervous about meeting Aslan because he is a lion. So one of the girls, Susan, says, "Is he safe? I shall be quite nervous meeting a lion." Mrs. Beaver, that's also a talking beaver, Mrs. Beaver says, "That you will, dearie, and make no mistake, if there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly." The youngest girl, Lucy, asks, "Then he isn't safe." "Mr. Beaver, safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he is good. He is the king, I tell you." So often we wish that God were a little tamer, a little safer, a little smaller. We see this power in the plagues, and it's so big and scary and all-encompassing, but we want God to be safe enough to let us live our lives the way we would like to live them. Small enough to fit into one corner that we keep for Sunday mornings or when we're going to small group or doing something spiritual, but not impacting the rest of our week. But God is big. God is powerful. God is just. And yet, at the same time, he is good. And even when it seems like the world is falling apart, when rivers of life turn to blood, when darkness replaces the sun, when pandemics hit, when we get bad news from a doctor, when natural disasters take over the news, when war breaks out, when relationships fall apart, God can do good in all things. We see God's rescue plan laid out in chapter 6. The plagues are confusing, but if we see God's purpose in Exodus 6, verse 7, it will be more clear. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. All of the plagues, all of the signs, all of the wonders are part of his plan to liberate his people from Egypt, to show them who he is, and to forge a relationship with them. This is God's mission statement in the Old Testament. He wants to be their God. He wants them to be his people. And he is willing to move heaven and earth, literally to move heaven and earth, to make that happen. And the same is true for us, that he wants to be our God. He wants us to be his people. The God of all, the God of judgment, the God of rescue wants to be in relationship with you. And so the question for us this morning is, if this is who God is, if he is a God who saves, if he's a God who has power over creation, if he is a God of divine justice, then how should we respond? Tommy earlier in the service read Psalm 46, which gives us a picture of this. It describes the earth giving way, mountains falling into the sea, nations raging, kingdoms tottering. Creation itself is falling apart. It's the plagues happening again. And yet, right in the middle comes God's command. Be still and know that I am God. And if we're honest, we might have a tough time in our lives relating to the plagues, to the decreation of the world itself. But we have all felt times where the ground was shaking beneath our feet. We've seen people that we depend on fall apart. We've experienced sin and brokenness in our own lives. We've seen the effects of addiction or sickness. We've seen pride and anger and lying tear apart relationships. And when we're facing storms, whether they're real or metaphorical, the answer is still the same. Be still and know that I am God. So I want to close with just 3 ways that we can live out this knowledge of God. First, we can know the God of awe by worshiping him. See, when we see God's power in the world, in creation, or even in our own lives, our reaction shouldn't be fear or being scared, but should be reverence and awe, standing in wonder, not treating him as small or safe, but seeing him as he is in his majestic sovereignty. And then we know that knowing Jesus makes us even more powerful, because Jesus had the power to not suffer, to not be tortured, to not be crucified, to not die on the cross. Yet he willingly gave of his power to act powerless on our behalf. So worship the God of awe. Second, we can know the God of judgment by obeying him. See, because God is God, because God is the only God, because God is the God above all earthly powers, it means that he has the right to lead us, to command us, to guide us, to set us on the right path, not because he's a control freak, but because it's the best thing for us. right? Too often we want to go out and on our own way, blaze our own trail. We worship our own idols, these functional false gods that we give undue priority in our lives. They may not look like the Egyptian gods and goddesses. They probably look more like our careers, our reputation, our retirement accounts, even our families. But we need to obey God and trust in his justice by prioritizing his words and his ways above our own plans and desires. Finally, we need to know the God of rescue by learning to wait on him. The Hebrews did not free themselves from Egypt. God rescued them. And he did not rescue them on their own schedule or on the schedule that they were hoping for. See, when we see God's power on display in creation, in the plagues, or even on the cross, it is very obvious that God could have saved his people in whatever way he wanted to. He could have picked them up out of slavery in Egypt when he saw they were being mistreated. He could have vanished them from there and picked them up and then put them directly into the land of milk and honey that he was preparing for them. He could have done all of these things with no mess, with no waiting, with no delay, with no pain, with no death. But God doesn't work this way. The Exodus way is a long journey that takes place in 3 stages. Where right now we're studying the road out of Egypt. Then we have the road between and the wilderness. And then finally the road into that promised land. The Exodus way doesn't allow us to run away and avoid the issues, but it confronts all of the idolatry, the oppression, and the brokenness that constrains us. The Exodus way isn't an easy path where nothing ever goes wrong, but one that requires our endurance and faithfulness. And in the midst of storms, of trials and chaos, when we are going through something in our own lives and our fight or flight kick in, and we either want to avoid the problem altogether or we want to fix it ourselves and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and get better, we have to remember that the Exodus way depends on us waiting and on trusting that God will provide a path. The plagues show us that the God of all, the God of judgment, the God of rescue, and in Jesus we see all 3 aspects of that as well. We see power over nature, we see justice over sin, we see ultimate rescue through the cross. And all of this, the Bible itself has one of the main purposes is that we would come to know him, that we would learn of him and be closer to him. In one of my favorite books, Knowing God, J.I. Packer writes that once you become aware that the main business you are here for is to know God, then most of life's problems fall into place on their own accord. This doesn't mean that everything in your life is easy to get around, but it means that if you know God, things start to fall into place. This is the invitation of Exodus. This is the invitation of the Gospels. Come and be known by the one who knows you.
Thanks for joining us today. Here at the chapel, we are all about making disciples of Jesus Christ. And we hope you'll join us as we walk the Exodus way and learn to trust God on the way out of Egypt, the way between in the wilderness, and the way into his presence.